Hey everybody, just a little viewer request video for today. This is DH Thorne. Now before I begin, I want to announce that my website has been growing and I've added some new features, including a forum, and it's not really super active yet, but that's because there really hasn't been much of an announcement or any attempt by me really to funnel people into it. I will say that a forum's a cool idea, but it's not my priority. But we'll see what happens. If people end up using it a lot, then I will be more active there, of course. So shout out to Carrie Darkstar for posting regularly and getting involved and trying to get conversations going. You are welcome there. I will respond to things there if you post them, so you can get my attention there too. Now this forum is meant to be a safe place for you to talk about your practices, but not a safe space for where you will never get, called out for anything or no one will bother you. But we will be monitoring to make sure that flame wars don't really happen. We'll lock threads that get out of control and stuff like that. So just try to keep it mature, and there won't be any problems. You can post whatever you want as long as it fits within the terms of service and you don't get us in trouble with pornography or whatever. So the links are in the description to my website along with other things. Now let's talk about the viewer request. The request today has a lot to do with shadow people. They basically asked me, are shadow people real or just in our minds? And that's a really good question, because so much of what a shadow person is, from my experience, is the answer is both. Now, before I begin, I want to remind you all, I am a self-published author, and one of my books is called Shadownomicon, and it is specifically about shadow people. And most of my experience in the occult actually originally revolved around working with them and some other entities, which I talk about in that book, leading me into a demonic current later on. But if you want to support me, that's a good way to do it. You can pick up that book, but I don't recommend it for beginners unless you just want to read it and experience it. If you want to work with it, however, you should be at a certain point in your practice where you don't have to ask basic questions. And of course, but otherwise it's still a useful book. There's a lot of information in there, and you can use some of the information in that book elsewhere, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But you need to understand that these beings are not benign, and they are not beneficial unless you've integrated your own shadow or use them to facilitate that. So I do go into great detail about these beings, and there are ways you can impact your life both for the benefit and for baneful things, both for you and others. And this book also contains methods for working with them. So if you like my perspective on these beings, that book would help fill in the blanks for you a great deal. Now, to answer the question, and I may have to do a few cuts in here because I have to feed my snake in a minute, so we'll see how that happens. If you hear a beep and then I shut up and then I come back, you'll understand. It's my experience that to answer that question, I have to partially answer another question, namely, are shadow people always shadow people? And no, shadow people are not always shadow people. Many of the shadows we see and experience in the supernatural and occult, practices that we have are not always technically shadow people. Many spirits manifest for us in shadow forms, and this can make it hard to distinguish one from the other. A god, a demon, or maybe a so-called ghost can manifest in a shadowy form. And shadow people, they have a somewhat recognizable habit of causing unnatural fear, shock, or dread when they're around. And I'm talking about even if you are a hardened war hero, even if you are a experienced occultist who's dealt with demons left and right, you may deny it, but deep down inside you will be feeling it. It is kind of unavoidable. Only experience with these beings can sort of help nullify that. Even I get a little bit of a sick feeling sometimes when they're around, and I have to overcome it sometimes to assert myself. It really depends. These are not like the typical friendly spirits, and there's going to be people who say, oh no, I feel great when they're around. Well, you're probably not dealing with these specific shadow people. There are exceptions, and I've had exceptions too where I felt right at home with them, but I'm trying to tell you that they're not all aligned with the same things. They are not all friendly. Even the ones that are willing to treat you gently are not always going to be friendly to you. So while a demon or another entity may or may not scare you, generally this is different. Usually if a demon or other entity scares you, it's because they don't want you around, or they're trying to teach you something, or any number of reasons. These beings, it's like an automatic thing. Their energy is disheartening, disconcerting, scary. They drain you of your interest and energy. They can cause anxiety, depression, all kinds of things. So now obviously if you see a shadow person or a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness with a vaguely humanoid shape, it's going to be scary for most people. I mean, even many accomplished metaphysical practitioners will still jump when they see something scary. I mean, it's just a natural physical reaction to it. But shadow people will give you the creeps regardless of any stimulus. You'll just feel uneasy or scared or terrified. You'll feel like something's walking up behind you in the dark. Maybe it's dark in your house and you'll be walking up a flight of stairs at night to go to bed. Maybe you've been in the basement or on the first floor. You shut off all the lights and it's time for bed. And you're going up the stairs and for whatever reason, all the lights are off. And there's the beeping for my snake, so I'll finish this sentence. So you're heading up the stairs and you feel this overwhelming urge, like something's creeping up behind you. And if you don't turn around, or if you do turn around, you're going to see something. So you walk a little faster and you flick all the lights and you close the doors and you try not to look behind you. So that's an example of something that can happen. Is it just the willies? Is it the heebie-jeebies? Is it just a natural thing? Of course. So any spirit can potentially do these things, okay? There's nothing stopping Balaam from coming to you as a dark shadow and stalking you through your house and scaring the shit out of you. There's really nothing stopping that. However, unless you have an adversarial relationship with them, chances are this won't ever happen. So the first thing to answering this question is identifying when it is in fact a shadow person versus another spirit. I feel this is very important because it is my experience that shadow people are much more likely to appear in a truly physical manifestation that is in the form of a shadow, be it something that's explainable as a trick of light and shadow or something inexplicable, so something mundane or miraculous. And we'll get on to why that's important in a minute. I have personally seen shadows that were obvious to everyone in attendance, and I've also seen shadows that only I could see, and I've seen shadows that I and a few others could see while others couldn't, and sometimes I've not seen the shadows that other people could, alone or in groups. So where the rubber really meets the road for me is the fact that there are instances of unexplainable shadow entities being caught on film. This is one of those things that, again, there are many hoaxes. Many are a case of mistaken identity, like an insect crawling on a lens, but every now and then we see something that can only be explained as the real thing. Now, this points to the probability that shadow people do in fact manifest physically, even if they have to use mundane phenomenon to do it. An errant shadow from some other source, like a reflection off of something or a glitch or something weird like that, completely rationally explainable, but it happens in a way that is supernatural. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's touch on the fundamental nature of the spirit world for a second. It is largely internal, and what this means is what we see when we see the spirit world is an internal manifestation, and with few exceptions, it's rarely objective. Usually we have a personal view of things that are going on. We'll have our own personal version with our own symbols that we see in our visions that are not necessarily matched. They will usually be close. This is one of the ways you validate your experiences, as you go around and you share with people you trust what you've experienced who also have similar sensitivities, and if they say that they've seen the same thing, well, that's one layer of validation at least. It's not necessarily proof in the scientific way, but at least you've got something now. You're not the only one who saw it, and that adds something to your work. But it may not match exactly. You might in a vision see a hawk and someone else will see a raven. Now, there's a pretty big difference between a hawk and a raven, but you're both seeing a bird, so you're kind of at least kind of sort of seeing something that's related. If you both saw a black bird but had no idea what kind of bird it was, okay, now you got an even better one. Or maybe you saw a hawk and they saw an eagle. Well, they're kind of mistakable to people who don't know them well. So there is that, okay? These are ways that things can differ but still be the same. And that's something to keep in mind when you're comparing your internal experiences with other people. How much does the symbolism match? And it doesn't have to be an exact match, but does it match? At least broadly. It's kind of like that game, which one of these things does not belong? Play that kind of a game with it. If you've got, a lot of minor differences, but the overall broad gist is the same, you can trust that you both had a similar or same experience with the same being. So even if we can't objectively prove what's happened, you still have something there that you can work with. Okay? So, and then here's the odd thing, of course, the difference between the internal and the external. What we see in the spirit world is, since it is an internal manifestation, with very few exceptions, is it really objectively seen by others. A lot of the times it's internal. And of course, many of you know that I am of the mind that even the objective world ultimately is an internal thing. You are internally experiencing the objective external world, and so therefore, it kind of sounds like solipsism, but it's not quite. So even when we can objectively prove something, it still requires an internal belief or choice to see it as something, well, whatever, being it spiritual, magical, or mundane. So you still have to kind of make a choice. So many things manifest in mundane ways, and it's up to us to connect the energies and see the patterns that point to the spiritual connection. In most cases, this is best described as synchronicity, and is the number one most common and compelling medium for magical manifestation. I often, because I maintain a somewhat skeptical attitude about other people's stories, it doesn't mean I don't believe you. It just means that I generally wonder, I'm always ready to assume or accept that you might not be telling me the truth or you're mistaken. So I don't always just assume, I saw Lucifer in my bedroom and we had tea together. I'm probably not going to give you a hard time about it, but I'm probably not going to internally go, yeah, this person saw Lucifer in their bedroom. Sure. It's not really going to be what even if it's happened to me, you know what I mean? Even if I know that that's possible, my first gut reaction is going to be probably not. So, if you are working with the shadow being current, and you're calling on, for example, Legion or Ranzael or one of the other shadow archetypes I list in my book as the Shadownomicon, and you see the entity with your physical eyes as a shadow manifestation, part of what lets you recognize it, not see it, but recognize it as a shadow being rather than just some hallucination or a trick of the light, is your internal awareness that the spiritual shadow is synchronistically connected to the mundane phenomenon that caused the shadow to be visible. So basically, in English, if you are performing the ritual as written in the book as you should be, and you're facing the portal, you're facing the veil, the cut in the veil that you've created, and you have the candle behind you, your shadows are going to be dancing all over the place from that candle flickering. It may sometimes look still, it may move. Eventually you will hallucinate a little bit. Eventually you will begin to see things just from a purely scientific perspective. It's unavoidable. You'll start to see movement in the room. It's dark, you have shadows flickering and a light behind you. It's a very, it's highly likely that you'll see things. Well, just because you can explain it as a trick of light and shadow doesn't mean that what you're seeing wasn't actually a spirit. It just means that it used that as a medium for manifestation. So if you see a shadow flickering and it looks out of the corner of your eye like another being standing in your room, and it scares you and you think that's where Ranzael's standing right now, he probably is where he's standing. Okay, he wanted you to notice that. If you have the sensitivity, this is why you can't be a complete novice to really experience this. And it's not because you see things that other people don't see. This is a common mistake. People will message me asking me, how do I open my third eye and see what you see? And I will tell them, you already do probably see the same things I see. You just don't recognize them. And this is a very common problem. And I know some will agree, and they'll say that's exactly how it works. And some people say, no, I actually see things others don't. I'm willing to admit also that is, of course, possible, if not 100%, not just probable, but certain. So I mean, you don't see things I see, and so on. We all have different gifts, and they're not all the same. And not all abilities are created equal. Some of them are easy to fool. A lot of people who say they can see energy, like auras and things. Well, there is, again, a scientific explanation for what's happening. Their eyes are getting basically fatigued with the color, with the contrast, and they can form a halo around things. It's totally proven in science. But going back to what I said a moment ago, that doesn't mean it doesn't have a spiritual or magical significance. The difference is discernment, knowing which is which, how to apply it, when it works, when it doesn't, and how to use it. There's a lot of hooey out there about that kind of thing. And it's really hard to pick apart. I don't really spend a lot of time on that because I already know what I know. I don't have to look at you and see energy, flickering all over you and emanating from you in a halo to know what you're feeling and thinking and to read your energy in other ways. So be aware of that. The gifts aren't always the same that we have, and they don't have to be, nor should they. It wouldn't be a very interesting experience if it was. We're supposed to come together with all of our different gifts, and kind of like there's a parable of 3 different monks who are holding on to different parts of an elephant, and these monks are blind, so they have no idea what they're touching. And so the one that's touching the trunk thinks he's touching a great big snake, the one who's touching the leg thinks he's holding a tree, and the one touching the tail thinks he's got a lion in his hands. So they each have a different idea. Actually, I think it's 4 monks, and one's riding on the back, and they think it's like a buffalo. The point is, each one's unable to see what the others see. We don't know what everybody sees, and each one of us has a different handle on the truth, and together we create a picture. So don't be bummed out if you can't see, okay, or if you can't hear or feel. Just learn that what you need to see, hear, learn, and feel is already within your grasp and capability. You just need to learn to recognize it. I don't like to put too many things in here that reference pop culture. I shouldn't say that. I do that all the time. But I don't want to, put clips of movies. But if you know the movie Signs, okay, for example, that's a really good movie in the sense that Mel Gibson's character has a point where he talks to his brother about basically discernment. Do you believe that things happen by accident or there's a reason for them? Both are probably true. Isn't that interesting? So, okay, all these things I'm talking about are not at all different from any other spiritual manifestation. So whether we're talking about demons who appear in smoke and flame, or the sounds of the walls creaking in your house when you're doing a ritual, or the sound of the wind on your house or in the trees or whatever, I've found that shadow beings, unlike many gods and demons, manifest for us through shadow phenomenon more than pretty much any other phenomenon. When they speak, even that has like a shadowy quality. It tends to be carried on the wind and sounds like raspy, whispery, like secrets, It's not always, but that's generally. Legion will be like, I am here, I'm listening to you, I'm watching. And you'll hear like 1,000 voices saying that, And it basically, to any expert, if I was to go to any psychologist or psychiatrist and tell them what Legion's like, instantly, you have schizophrenia, here's this medication, we'll make sure, medication, well, here's this medication, we'll get you to stop seeing Legion, don't worry, he'll go away. And he probably would, because I'd be deadened, my mind would be a little bit neutered in that sense. Well, whatever. So, of course, some of this stuff could just be a pop culture expectation. I have researched these beings a while. I have a certain idea in my head of what they're supposed to be like. I'm instructing you on what they're supposed to be like. So when you experience them, they're probably going to be like that. For example, some people who see shadows never see them with eyes. Most people rarely ever see them with mouths. They're usually male. Some only ever see the Hat Man. Some people never see the Hat Man. Some people always see eyes, and some people always see eyes that are white, and some always see red, etc. Some of this is, we can sort of say it's probably because these are different classes of shadow being, or different examples of them. I'm hesitant to do that because the spirit world doesn't work quite like the physical world. There isn't like a biology and evolutionary ladder. We don't have all that. We have different species. So it doesn't quite work that way. It's mostly symbolic. And a lot of the time those symbols are personal and internal, so they can show up differently for all of us. That's my interpretation of things. Some would disagree, and that's fair. So at least some of what we're seeing, again, is internal and subjective, i.e., or in other words, we create it out of our imagination. It's just that our imagination is inspired by the truth, or is caused by the truth. It's kind of like the left half of your third eye or something like that. That's one way you could think of your imagination. It is a part of your third eye. If you don't see anything around you, it's because your imagination's not working somehow. You're not using it. You need to use your imagination. You actually have to role play a little bit on some level, and I really think that's the easiest way to get into invocation or channeling or possession. Begin with role play, and respectful role play. Don't just insist that that's what's happening. Start off, just try it. Just get in the spirit, act like the spirit, see what happens. And it's kind of like harmonizing. When you harmonize with the frequency of the spirit by acting like it, it just opens the floodgate. They'll come roaring in and take over. That's what will happen. Well, in the same sense, if you role play this and you kind of get carried away, and that is the point. You get carried away until you see what's there. And I know how irresponsible that sounds to a skeptic. This sounds like an intentional attempt to mess with your sense of reality, but that's what magic is. That's exactly what spiritual practice is. That's why you take peyote and all of these kinds of LSD and all these kind of psychedelics. You're messing with your sense of awareness. You're trying to see through the delusion in the first place, and you have to recognize that it is all a delusion. And since it is all a delusion, though it is a useful one, it's an objective delusion that we all kind of agree on, it's still just an illusion, and you can meddle with it, tweak it, and change it to be what you want. And in so doing, you change the outcome of events. You also change the outcome of what you see, hear, and feel. It begins to have meaning, and so on. And some people will disagree, of course. Well, anyway, if you are interested in working with shadow people, if you feel like you're at a suitable skill level where you don't need anybody's help to evoke spirits or anything like that, and you want to see if you can commune with the shadow beings, so long as you heed my warnings in the book, I do highly recommend picking up my book, Shadownomicon, as it outlines a ritual format that, to be honest, I've adopted and adapted it from and for my demon sorcery practices as well. It is a really beautiful ritual setup, which is really useful. You can definitely change it if you know what you're doing. It's easy to change. You just change a few variables around. You can turn it into a ritual that you use to commune with any spirit that might be on the other side of the veil, or a spiritual being, something in the astral plane, etc. It will work for that. But the shadow stuff, it works really well with that. And the shadow beings are listed in there that I've experienced, that I recognize. And the ones that I explain in there, the system that I put in there, the rituals that I put in there are recognized by those beings, and allows you to have an intentional method to try to work with them in an amicable, safe way. It's not really safe. There is no such thing as safe in this stuff. This is kind of like you put your seatbelt on, you got your crash helmet on, and you're in a good rated car for impact, and you decide to get into a demolition derby. It's kind of like what you're doing with this. So totally survivable if you know what you're doing, and if you do what I tell you, you'll probably be okay. But keep in mind, the shadow people are not friendly by default. Goetic spirits, if you approach them with respect, they will return the favor most of the time. I have rarely seen somebody approach them with respect and get BTFO'd. It's almost always going to be a like for like type of experience with them. Shadow people, not always, not so much. I've seen people approach them with utter reverence and be kicked to the curb, destroyed, crushed, and beaten, and I've seen people mouth off to them who were elevated by them. So, they feed upon your Jungian shadow, and this means that they don't have to be nice or mean to you to bring that shadow forward and feed upon it. They will get you to do whatever it takes to suffer, basically. And it could be a long con or it could be a short con. They might get you in the long game or the short game. They might get you scare you right now, drain you a little bit right now, and go away picking their teeth, or they're setting you up for a big time suffering down the road where they're just going to enjoy watching your shadow kill you, essentially is what it boils down to. So they will try to encourage you to, experience or take actions that will cause dark emotions. They will, it's in their interest to scare you, to tweak you, to piss you off, to tempt you with your worst addictions and weaknesses. And if you approach them as a dabbler just looking to see something scary, it could potentially go really badly for you really quickly. And if you do not know how to work with energy, or you get lazy, you start working with them and you just kind of start ignoring them or something, they can get kind of antsy. They can be difficult. If you don't create a super offering in the form of a corrupted stone, as I describe in the book, I suppose you might be able to create your own way of doing that, but I really don't recommend it. At least do it the way I suggest once on your own, and then you can try something else if it's not working right for you. But at least attempt to use the corrupted stone method that I put in my book. You can use that to safely kind of placate them. You feed them. It's almost like, imagine you're like a vampire and you have to feed from people. Well, instead of going out and murder people, you find a way to get a willing donor. That's almost like what this corrupted stone does for you. It actually serves two purposes. When you use this stone, you actually help purge your dark emotions using that stone as a battery that you then give as an offering to them. And this puts you in control of when, how, and why this energy is released, meaning they have less incentive to cause you misery that you can't control. Okay, so that's one thing. And you can use it to pick up all dark emotions, not just your own. You can have it from other people. So, of course, if you're already highly integrated, you're somebody who is pretty good with their own shadow already. They don't have a lot of skeletons in their closet. They don't have a lot of things that cause them to have fear and anxiety and stuff. You'll do a little better because they'll have less things to tweak you with, but they will still find or create something for you to deal with. Something. We always have a shadow. You can't get rid of it. You never should attempt to. You should only try to integrate and understand it. And it will always develop new features. Sooner or later, even the minute before you die, you'll develop a new, trust me, every minute there's a new challenge in your life. And this is fertile soil for creating new shadows. So no matter how trivial things might seem to you right now, it could develop into a problem later. You get a flat tire on the highway. Yeah, that sucks. Doesn't really ruin your life, but it could make you paranoid about your tires for a while, and that gives you like a shadow experience. You basically have a shadow right now. It's a very minor, weak one, but it's there. This could develop into something bigger over time, a fear of driving or something like that. So be aware these things are real. So again, if you still approach them as instructed, and if you get through all this and you decide that you're better off working on another system or getting away from them, or if you want to work with them, this book would be useful, even if you just want to use it for entertainment. So I do recommend it, and I do talk a lot more about this stuff in that book. So for those of you who've been supporting my work, I want to thank you. There are links to my books and Patreon in the description, and if you have any more questions about shadow people, I'm happy to answer them. Even if it's in the book, I'm willing to talk about it to a point. You'll know what stuff is rational for me to talk about, so without ruining what I have in the book for you. So again, thank you for your time. Give me a like, a subscribe, leave me a comment. That helps me out in the algorithms that YouTube has been forced on everybody lately, and I appreciate your time.